All right, I'm going to invite the panel to come up now for step families. All the committee members. These are the Family Builders Conference organizers. And we're really excited that this conference is going on. I think that the topics that we've covered this year have been really exceptional so far, and we're looking forward to some more. All right, for those of you that don't know, this is James King right over here on the end. He's the pastor at Yahweh's Assembly Seventh Day in Cisco, Texas. Scott Lees here is from Michigan, and he has a home fellowship with his family and other people that come every month or every week on Sabbath. We have Hector Castillo, who's the pastor at Shalom Assembly in Sterling, Illinois, and I think most of you have met Keith by now, and he's the youth pastor at the Assembly of Yahweh Seventh Day in Cisco as well. So we're really excited. Did I say something good or wrong? Oh, the smiles were all good? All right. Hey, sometimes these guys smile at me. I think maybe I spoke something wrong. They got me all self-conscious. But let me tell you something about step families. We actually have a little video we're going to show you. And one of the reasons that we moved this panel to today on Sabbath is that we wanted to have an impact as many people, because we've done this several other times, and it's amazing how many people today are affected by a step family, or what some people call blended families. Keith mentioned Ron Deal. And I think that Ron Deal is one of the most educated people on step families, and his heart is for seeing families thrive and move together. And as we continue in our culture, we see more and more blended families, and that's blended families of all kinds. It's step families because of marriage, it's second marriages because of divorce or because of death or because of other challenges that have taken place in the families. It also moves into the realm of adoption, where there's a lot of the same issues that come out of step families. It also moves into the realm of when you're fostered parents and taking care of children, even some of the issues that we've been dealing with at this conference. But step families bring their own special needs and special care to see them successful. And we found that so many people today, even when the first time we did this discussion as our panel on the committee, as we were talking about the questions that we were going to deal with, we found out that each one of these guys have come from a blended family, if that's the term you want to use, and they've all had issues, and we've all had issues from the outflow of what that happened and the way that all happened. So it really does affect a lot of people, and we think it's really important for us to be smart about this subject and to educate ourselves so that we can either be smart as we're continuing with our blended family, or we can help others around us, because a lot of people need a little bit of education on how step families work. Does that make sense? So I want to show this video. You guys are all mature, aren't you? Is anybody not mature in here? Okay, don't raise your hand, brother. It's okay. I wasn't really asking for the truth. No, you guys are all mature. This video came from Family Life and Ron Deal, and it really shows how the relationships within a step family change over time, and what happens in the dynamics of how many relationships are affected with this. So I wanted to show this, but it has some references to holidays and other things like that. But I know you guys are all mature to see the bigger picture of what's going on, because I think it really helps us create a sense of what we're looking at. All right, if you want to cue that video, that'd be great.
Our story begins when this guy met this girl and fell madly in love. First came love, then came marriage. Then came Emily, Michael, and John in a baby carriage. They were living the dream until doubt and isolation tore love apart. One love and one home became two. In another part of the world, a loving marriage welcomed two beautiful children. Life and love for this couple went along as they hoped, and they too were living the dream. Until Mom became ill. Bad became worse, and worse ended the dream. Courageously, Dad strove to pick up the pieces and help his grieving children carry on. And together, they did. Until one day when this lady met this fellow. Wait, where have I heard that before? Oh well. One thing led to another, and a new dream for a new home was born. Yes, they knew there would be challenges merging homes, extended families, parenting strategies, finances, loss experiences, and holiday traditions, but they were confident that love would see them through. With hearts full of hope, they married. In the meantime, this guy, remember him? Announced that he and his girlfriend were getting married. They too had a dream for a new home. Okay, let's recap, shall we? What started out as 2 simple homes with 4 parents and 5 kids became 3 homes with 3 parents and 5 kids. And then became 2 homes with 2 parents, 2 step-parents, 5 children, 5 stepchildren, and the living memory of a deceased mother. And 5 sets of grandparents, dozens of cousins, uncles, and aunts, colliding family traditions, kids with divided loyalties, a home with 5 children on some days and only 2 the next, 2 bedtimes, differing parenting styles, conflict between homes, debt from the past, questions about whether this marriage will last, and 4 adults who quickly realize that their simple dream to recreate their dream home has instead created a multi-household family that is not simple at all, but complex. Love and hope has brought these families together, but how do they manage the complexity? And how do they make the dream reality? To find help, this home went to their local church. To their surprise, they found a ministry to blended families just like theirs. They weren't alone. With the help of Family Life Blended and their local church, this home found answers to the questions stepfamilies ask. For most, becoming a healthy stepfamily has its challenges. Becoming stepfamily smart is the first step toward helping this home and others like it live the dream. Live your dream. Family Life Blended, strengthening stepfamilies.
All right, so it's no doubt that this becomes very complex very fast in the step families or the blended families, if you will, whichever term you prefer. I had a chance to meet Ron Deal a few months ago at a conference that they had, and we tried really hard to get him to come to our conference here, but he was booked for the year, so we're hoping in the future that we can get him here. He was really intrigued by what we're doing, and he was really appreciative of what we're doing, so who knows what the future holds. But again, we just want to have a discussion about this, so we're going to ask some questions up here with the panel. And then as we ask those questions, if you guys have questions or if you have some comments or thoughts as we're going along, just let us know and we'll try to get the guy with the mic who is, what's that? He's here. All right. He's in the audience. He's hiding over there, seeing if I'm aware of where he's going. All right, brother. We'll direct you around. But we really want to have a good discussion. We really want to give some information that we think is very valuable for anybody that's in a step family or a blended family situation. And we'll be happy to hear your questions as well. So let's start out with Keith. One of the things that we find in the step family is as soon as a blended family comes together, either a new mom or a new dad, the first thing that has to happen is establish some kind of a relationship with the children that are either not theirs or however that works out in whatever situation it is. And so the question that we have is how do you step in and earn the respect of the children, especially the stepchildren?
Sure. So my situation, my history is that my mom and dad got pregnant before they got married, and then they got married, and that didn't work out, so they got divorced. And when I was a baby, probably no older than 1 or 2, they got divorced, and they both remarried. My mom married about 6 years later, and my dad about 10 years later. So I was blessed with 2 amazing step-parents. Terry is my stepdad, and Dee Dee is my stepmom. And so one of the things about earning the respect, in my opinion, just from my experiences, is that both Terry and Dee Dee were extremely gracious in the fact that they didn't try to assert an overt amount of authority in my life, and they became my friend first. And Terry specifically would do wood carving with me. He would hang out with me, play Nintendo with me, go to the park. I mean, we would just have fun together. And, from my earliest childhood memories, I have Terry as those. And I just recall that he invested in me and spent time with me. Mm-hmm. Dee Dee was the same way. Dee Dee had an amazing black little sports car. She taught me how to drive when I was 8 or 9 years old. And
that'll win the heart.
Yeah, and it did. And she was super kind and sweet to me, especially when my dad was mad or mean to me. She would come to my defense. And so I think one of the things about my experience is they wanted to just be my friend first and just start the relationship with me in a real non-threatening way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important because then when the authority needed to come later, then the relationship had already been
Yeah.
established.
So really non-threatening and friendly, and trying to establish that kind of a relationship before asserting authority.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else have any thoughts on that on the panel? Or anybody else as we go along? Again, that we want to have an open discussion. So if any of this sparks a thought or a question, go ahead and feel free to raise your hand. I think it is really important to establish that kind of a relationship. I think one of the things that I've seen that's caused a lot of trouble with situations is you have, let's say, a lady who marries a man, and she has 2 children, and then they have maybe a couple of children they're bringing in there, and then all of a sudden they just walk right into it with this thought that Yahweh put me in charge as the authority of the man in the house, and they just assume control before they establish that kind of relationship. And I think that all too often that just kind of spills out a lot of issues that then are going to have to be dealt with. And as I've seen step families and blended families work out is that the more you push into those kind of negative behaviors and those kind of negative thoughts, then it's awfully hard to turn it back around. So earning respect and trying to establish that kind of relationship early really promotes a lot better health for the family as you go on.
But I could just add one more thing.
Sure.
I was also blessed with a lot of really great step grandparents. And I guess one of the things that I just knew growing up is that Terry's family accepted me, without question, and I was treated, very equally, and so did Dee Dee's family as well. So that can also be a benefit, if you're a step parent or whatever, just making sure that your parents are lined out on this new role, maybe, and the acceptance factor. I was slightly rejected by one step grandparent, but her husband, my step grandpa, was super accommodating, so it all worked out.
That's good.
But
we need those people in our life on our side for sure.
Kind of fun.
Yeah, it's true, and I think grandparents offer a lot of help in this kind of situation as well, if they're thinking right about the situation. All right, Hector. So again, when we have blended family situations, a lot of the time you have, obviously, if it's a second marriage situation or if it's a place where there was a lot of tension and a lot of disturbance in the home before, and then 2 people separate, and then they maybe get another spouse or another boyfriend comes along or whatever, and then they have to shuffle the kids from house to house. There's always that tension from the child going from this house to this house. So we're really looking for some practical advice on how to, work in the situation to keep the peace between the parents and the ex-spouses as they move along, because that dropping off period and picking up time and just different house, the way it works out, usually offers, some chaos and other things like that. So
yeah, that's a pretty good question, and it's probably one of the most difficult questions, because when you consider the tension, the emotion that goes into it of, I'm dropping my son off at his father's house, and he's going to pick up my son, and then he's going to take him to his girlfriend's house. So there's that kind of, anger. And I think the biggest thing is to remain objective, and the objective is to create an environment where the son can thrive. And instead of becoming negative and talking bad about the father or the mother, whatever the case may be, it's best to always find the objective and to stay on the objective of creating a healthy environment for the son or daughter. And if you're going to badmouth the father, don't do it to the child, because now the child is carrying on them the weight of the guilt. And when they get to that place, personally, in my experience, I can remember my mom hating what would have ultimately been my stepmom. And so I learned as a young kid that if I went to go visit my stepmom, I could not tell my mom. Like, it didn't take long for me to realize that. Like, I just cannot say I went here, because she would immediately explode. And then it wasn't just the explosion, it was the nonstop spewing of hatred towards my dad. Mm-hmm. And so then I realized, okay, so it kept me from basically talking to my mom, and I was probably maybe 5 or 6, and even then I knew I could not tell her, where I had gone, so I learned to deceive her and to lie to her, because I knew if I didn't lie to her that she would then tear into me and then talk bad about my dad. So that's why it's extremely important that you consider not just your words, but also the kind of pressure that you're putting on your child, because your child, to cope, is going to do things that you don't want them to do, such as lie to you, they're going to do that, and they're going to learn. And that's what I did. And so stay objective, consider the environment. Obviously, you need to vent. You have to vent, and you need to vent. But find the adult, find the area away from so your son can't hear all the negativity that you're spewing out about their dad or their mother, etc. And that's really the biggest thing. I know, saying this, because I lived through it as a child, that it's very hard. And so it takes really commitment from you and focus to do something that is contrary to your spirit, contrary to your nature, because you've been hurt, you've been offended. And that's one of the most difficult things to do. But you can do it. You are able to do it if you think about it and focus on it. And you're going to make mistakes. And when you make the mistake, you apologize. You apologize to the child because they understand apology. You apologize to them, and then you begin to change that behavior.
Yeah. And I can remember a couple of times where I've seen actual exchanges that happened between, hostile parties where the children were taken from one car to the driveway and then just kind of left. They didn't even want to walk up to the house. And I was in a neighborhood one day and I saw this kind of play out, and it's almost shocking to hear what someone says in front of their children. I think that one of the things that you're talking about is you can master this by mastering your emotions and planning and strategizing on how to control yourself through that exchange, because it's awfully, my ears burned from hearing that. I felt so sorry for that child that it's like, and I think that's one of the things in our family situations that we have to think is principle above selfish whatever pride or whatever we have to do that. Of course, we want to be mad at someone who's mistreated us in the way that we think that that's happened, but at the same time, we have to manage the family and do well by our children. And so keeping your emotions under control and then having those conversations when your children aren't there is one real key in my mind to making that work out like you're describing, really mastering yourself. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts on that, James?
Yeah, so I was a police officer for many years, and a lot of the interactions that we had, our police department became a drop-off point for kids from one family to the next. And just seeing the interaction, first of all, that they wanted to meet at the police department in order to keep the situation safe and semi-civil, just so that one parent wouldn't be threatened by the other parent during this interaction. And to see that play out on the face of the kids whenever mom and dad are out in front of the police department yelling at each other about all these past interactions, and the kids having to witness all of this and go through this, it's just a heartbreaking scenario.
Yeah.
And so we all recognize that the situation that led to the parents splitting up is most of the time a very bad situation. There's a lot of hurt feelings there. But you've got to step back and realize that the kid is not at fault here, but the kid is taking a lot of the brunt of this assault. As he's witnessing this in the presence of these people fighting, it's demeaning to him, just like we've already seen in our presentations. When they hear these things, they get the feeling that they're worthless, that they don't have any value in this family because all they witness is fighting. And so, if you're in this type of situation, you really need to step back and realize that you can't let the kids see this. Whatever happens between you and your ex, you have to maintain a good relationship in front of the child so that the child doesn't grow up with these bad feelings of the conflict between wanting to defend their mom or wanting to defend their dad to their mom or dad. So they have loyalties along both sides, and they really get divided in all this fighting, and really tears them up.
And one of the things that I just, again, as we go in the conference, we want to bring Yeshua into our discussions. And I think as we're talking about that, and I've seen the tension, I know you've seen the tension in other people like that, but one of the things that we need to do is I believe it's really a good practice for people who are in this kind of a situation where they have all these hard feelings and it's really tough. I think you need to begin to cultivate a prayer life for that situation to de-escalate, and ask Yeshua to show you specific things that you can do and reveal to you your heart so that you can make a difference and overcome that. And I believe as we pray for people, even though we think maybe they're enemy or they're, not doing us well, there's something that happens in the whole midst of that. And that we had some testimonies at the conference that we went to where people were really had to get control of themselves, and they were out of control. And then they began to pray for the family and other people in their life that they had bad relationships with, and it began to help the family of their origin, where they were right now. The chaos began to come down. And that's what we're really looking for. That's the goal. And Yeshua can bring it. He knows all of our messes, and there isn't any heart unconquerable if we can come before him in honesty and start talking about who we really are, and then let that reality drive our decision making and our behaviors. So I really think that we need to add that redeemed, that restored part in there to make sure that this is alive and well. All right. Again, if you have a question or a comment, please just raise your hand, and then we'll recognize you as soon as I see you. For Scott, what we're looking for sometimes when we have like a blended family that's come together, so we have the children and we have the stepchildren. Sometimes when the stepchildren come into the space, maybe there's the children in the house that are there. The permanent children are feeling a little like their time is being taken away from them. And so how would a step-parent divide their time to still maybe spend quality one-on-one time with their own children, or some more extra time, and how to relieve that tension that might be building in that situation?
I think the first thing to remember is that in a marriage where you have two people come together and they have their own children together, the marriage is the primary relationship. And the relationship between the parents and the children is a secondary relationship. I believe if you don't have a strong marriage, then the relationships in the whole family are at risk. But it's a little different when you have a blended family situation, because you have a parent who has a relationship with their child before they have a relationship with the new spouse. And so the primary relationship in this case is between the parent and the child rather than the two parents. And so it changes the dynamics completely. So I think it's important, first of all, for the step-parent coming into this situation to realize that dynamic. And once that's understood, it lessens the burden on the biological parent to somehow prove their loyalty to the marriage, let's say. And then in order to more directly address the question, I think it's important for that relationship, especially as children go through their teen years, they want that attention that they've always gotten from their biological parent. Now, back a little bit to what Keith said earlier, if you have a good step-parent, then all this becomes much easier, right? Because there's not this jealousy, there's not this tension that develops in the family. But too often it's not like that. And so I think it's very important for the biological parent and their new spouse to understand that each of those parents are going to need to spend time with their biological children in spite of trying to blend these families together. Because in spite of our best efforts, there's a lot of growth that has to occur in that, right? I'll give you a little bit of my own family situation. It has to do with my daughter and my grandson. My daughter got married young after she knew somebody for 10 weeks. They eloped. And we were surprised at this marriage. And we were surprised at the pregnancy announcement that came right on its heels. That marriage didn't last. It didn't last for a year, as was pretty predictable, right? So out of that, today we have a 12-year-old grandson, and for years my daughter had no relationship with anybody else, and so she and my grandson lived with us, right? And so my wife and I took on a lot of the role of parenting, not really, but sort of, right? So, because they lived in our household. Anyway, a couple years ago, my daughter's got her life together and things are going great. And she meets a guy she works with, and they're friends and they're getting to know each other, and I can tell where things are headed with this. And make a long story short, they got married a couple years ago, and then the two of them now have another child. We have another little grandson. He's about 16 months old. And so now my 12-year-old grandson, 11 at the time, has a baby brother, okay? And so this is changing the whole dynamics in the family. And it's been interesting to watch the relationship between my grandson Caleb and his stepdad David. And it was a rough go for quite a while, because David did the thing, and he'll freely admit this, that Keith was talking about a step-parent shouldn't do. trying to exert that authority, right? Because the only authority Caleb knew was from his mom, from his grandma, and from me. Those were the authority figures in his life. And so this new zealous father who doesn't yet have a child of his own is very zealous to prove himself as a worthy husband and father. That was a little rough for a while. But the dynamic has changed considerably just in the last 6 months, as he's decided through some advice that he's gotten that the dynamic had to change, and that befriending his stepson was a much better way to do things. And then I'll bring in the grandparent thing as well then, because now Caleb, for years he just had Jill and I as his grandparents. Now he has this new set of grandparents, and they're very, very nice people. We know them, we've interacted with them. Great family. And over the last couple months, Caleb has finally felt comfortable enough where he stayed overnight with them a few times, right? And it's just really turning into a pretty cool situation. Nevertheless, through all of that, there's still times when he needs his space with his mom. And he doesn't want anybody else in that space. He doesn't want dad. He doesn't want grandparents. He doesn't even want little brother. He just wants his space. And she accommodates that, and they have a good time. It might just be going out to McDonald's for an hour or something, whatever it might be. But they're very aware that has to happen. And I've seen the positive results of that. So it's just an important thing to address. And the step-parent has to be on board with that to make it work successfully.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Appreciate that. It's awfully hard to keep those relationships in order. You did a really good job going through there. I appreciate that. The biological and the blended. So it's really tough. But yeah, there's just so many issues that spring out of that. And I remember when I started reading the books, there's three of them that Ron Deal has primary: smart step family, and then the smart step dad, and the smart step mom. And I think that they're just a wealth of information for dealing with things that right to the heart of this matter. Even things that you may not even know is affecting you in your relationship, you'll find that information in there. And he's done a really good job of ciphering that out and giving us these simple ways. These are really good topics that we have here. And I know that if you're in a blended family situation, these topics are right at the heart of what you're in for and what you've been going through, and also how you've come through that. Elise, go ahead.
I think for, excuse me, as parents, it is kind of foreign to us to say, oh, be your child's friend, because we hear, no, you don't need to be their child's friend, you need to be your child's parent, So, but I think the biggest thing in the step-family relationship is that it's a slow relationship, and it's more of a crock pot cooking, not a microwave or even pressure cooker is what a lot of times it really is you're trying to get that thing, okay, now I'm your dad. But it's really not. You have to get a relationship. You didn't meet that person and say, okay, let's now get married. You spent your time getting to know that person, so you should at least give that to your children too. Let them get into this slowly. Even if you've spent time, oh yeah, we went to the park together for months and months, and we knew them they were in our lives for whatever, but you didn't live with them, and you weren't dad. So there's a big difference, and to slowly move into those relationships is so important.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a pressure cooker, yeah. I mean, those are real things. I know that if you're involved in that situation, or if you have, anywhere along the way, if you're dealing with your children who are in that situation, it's tough. I mean, it really becomes a challenge with all these relationships. And the one thing I always remember to remind myself, even though I'm not in that situation, is that anytime that happens, is that the two adults chose where they're going. And the children are now forced to comply with all of that choosing that they have no control over at all. So it's like almost a part of what their control's gone, and now they have to give it to what you're choosing to do with your life. So it's tough everywhere, and it can be so much pressure. What's that?
It's like an arranged marriage.
Yeah, like an arranged marriage of sorts. Yeah, except you have the children already rolling.
Even with the biological parents, you've had years to develop a relationship with your own children. As they grew from birth, they had so much time to develop a relationship with you as their parent, and now you throw a stepchild in there and you expect it to happen automatically, and it just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, it's true. Go ahead. We have another comment or question over there.
I think one of the mistakes that the biological parent may make is they forget that when you date somebody, your child's dating them as well. And I think there needs to be a boundary drawn that should be set. Like for my wife and I, we had several dates for the first month where I didn't really interact with the children very much because we were focusing on our relationship and figuring out if it was going to work before she kind of really introduced me to her kids until they got to know me. So I think that's really crucial because kids are so impressionable, and if you're constantly taking them on dates with you with other people, you set that expectation, like Keith talked about, the perfection. They have an expectation of somebody wanting to love them, and then that person's gone. Well, what happened to that person? So you create more damage by not being smart about your dating practices as a single parent. Yeah. And I think that's something that needs to be really looked at too. Another thing too is some people will say, well, I heard some people say there's no examples of step parenting in the Bible, in Scripture sometimes. But we look at Joseph, and he was one of the first stepdads that's really put out there. And we have other examples of that too. So I think it's important to know that we have other scriptures to look at how to be a parent of a child that is not ours.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and again, all those issues come up, and we have to deal with them as they come, and hopefully we're trying to make the right impact. But one thing I can guarantee you with what I've seen and read and understood about blended families is that if your heart is to think about your children and consider where they are, you'll always make better decisions about where you're going with the family. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes in our selfishness we get lose sight of, and we begin to put our children in at-risk situations or unhealthy relationships. Okay, let's ask another question for James. Maybe along the same lines in some ways, but how do we deal with loyalty issues between spouse and children? Sometimes that comes out with maybe there's jealousy between the time that biological dad or mom is spending with the child, and they're feeling like they're getting left out, and it just becomes this whole loyalty thing. We were here before you came along, and that pressure can be pretty intoxicating as well in a situation.
Yeah, one of the first things you have to realize is none of this is easy. This is tough. You got into this situation because of a bad situation, and now you're just trying to make the best of it. And as Scott was saying earlier, now you have a whole flipped dynamic in the family where the primary relationship is between a parent and their biological child, and the step-parent comes in, and you're trying to create a life with a step-parent, but it's taking on a kind of a backseat role with the relationship you have with your child. And just raising children in a normal family is hard enough. You get every kid wants to play one parent against the other in a normal family. If mom said no, I'm going to go to dad and see what dad says, and try to work whatever situation to my benefit. And whenever you add the dynamic of now you've got your natural parent versus a biological parent or a step parent, you're creating this whole dynamic that really has to I guess be dealt with carefully. And in the midst of all of this, as parents, you're trying to foster a relationship that lasts beyond your child. In every marriage, the ultimate goal is to raise your kids and send them off to create their own families, and you are left with your spouse that you began with, and to create this new life, and to rediscover who you are after 20 years of raising kids or 30 years of raising kids, however many. Well, now you've got this new dynamic with a second marriage, and this child who has a stronger bond with one side than the other sometimes wants to play that against the other parent. Sometimes the parent feels a deeper loyalty to their child naturally than they do to their new spouse. But the ultimate goal is to raise that child, send it off to create a new family, and you to remain with your husband or wife. And so it's kind of a tough situation where you feel a natural bond, a stronger bond to your child, but the ultimate goal is not to keep that relationship in the same manner. That child has to go create his own family, and you're left with your husband or wife. And so that's something you really have to keep in mind, and it becomes especially a struggle whenever you get this dynamic of playing one parent against the other, and so the parents really have to focus and come together on the same team. That's right. And say that we are going to agree together on how to handle these situations, on how to handle issues such as discipline or rules for the various children in the household. We don't want different rules for different children. Everybody has to be treated the same so that they all feel like they're part of the same family and not just two families shoved together.
Well, that's a really good point, is that we have to be on the same team. And I think that reminder needs to be out there all the time, especially when the struggle comes, that we're on the same team, we're trying to accomplish the same goal. We're trying to raise a family. It may not be the perfect situation, but it's a situation that we have, and we have to keep focused on that goal. And one of the things is, Hector has a comment as well, but one of the things I think that I kept hearing over and over again when we were talking about the step families at the conference is that the more together the marriage is, the more together the whole family is going to be. The more together you are on discipline, the more together you are on how the changing between households go, the more together you are on almost every issue that you face. If you guys are doing it together, then you're going to have a lot more control over the situation in your home. And I think that speaks right to what you're saying, is the marriage has to be solid. And then from there, the other relationships can flow and grow. Go ahead, Hector.
Yeah, I was just thinking something that, from what James was saying, what I was taking from it is that if the other parent is not abusive or dangerous to the child, they are 50% the parent still. So maybe you're not happy with the way situations are, but you are their mother, but he is their father. And he has a responsibility, and the child has the right to be with his dad or to be with his mom. And I think, because we want to own, we like to just own. It's my kid. It's not your kid, it's my kid. No, it's his kid or it's her kid as well. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing you got to realize, is that it helps them to recognize that it's good for your child to be with their dad or with their mom.
Yeah. One of the stories that we heard, just talking about that was, I remember one lady was talking about, she made a decision early on in the step family situation because her first husband had went to prison or had some troubles or things like that. But she committed herself to not speaking badly about him in front of the child, but always trying to say something that was good, or anything she could get close to try to keep that real negative energy from entering into him. And although she can't change, she didn't change the way that his life was and what he did. That's the husband who's now gone out of the relationship. But one of the things that she said as time went on that she could see is that because she was speaking healthy things to the child, that the child grew up with a healthy understanding of who he was, and then from there he could express, and so it began to be a really good thing for the child and his relationship. And that's really, like when she was speaking about that, I thought, man, how difficult would that be to to not, to really concentrate and really make a boundary around that, to say, I'm not going to speak this way, but I'm going to choose other things. And I think that's really one of the big keys in these kind of situations is that we do have choices if we'll ask the right questions. And we do have different ways to look at things and maybe approaches that we haven't seen yet or tried yet that would work. So I think it works out really good. Keith, do you have something to add?
I just wanted to add to the loyalty discussion. Ron Deal does talk about in a situation where two families are coming together, perhaps a dad with a couple of kids and a mom with a couple of kids, they already have traditions that they're involved in, things that are sacred to them. His example was, the dad goes and on Sundays they either watch baseball or they go to a baseball game. And the mom had a tradition of going to church or whatever on Sundays. And so when they come together, the idea is to force these kids into that tradition or these kids into that tradition. And one of the things Ron said is it's not necessarily required, and that you can still have, for a time, as again, like Elise is talking about the crock pot method, as this group is coming together, we can still have, hey, I'm going to take the kids to the baseball game or whatever, and I'm going to take the kids to church. And then eventually, as those things start to mold together, well, then we can start doing the crossover and, would you like to come with us to the baseball game? Would you like, and so that was a great example, and it was eye-opening for me because I'd never heard that before. Sure. So, again, we don't have to force everything right away, and the loyalty issues, that certainly can come up because, you've been, she hasn't been in our life for all these years, and we've got this baseball tradition or whatever, and now all of a sudden you're bailing on me to go, do this thing. Mm-hmm. And it creates those loyalty challenges.
It definitely does. And those are all challenges, and they're very real. And again, we talked about forgiveness last night, and I can't stress or say how important it is to realize that, in a marriage when it breaks down, there's a lot of fault to be going around to everyone. And then just taking charge of that and letting forgiveness and letting those things override our emotions. Emotions get high and so if we're angered or if we're emotionally stressed or we let someone push our buttons or move all those, our choices become limited. And if we can take things like the concept of forgiveness and start extending that as far and as much as we can, then I think I do believe that our choices become more. We get to see a different pattern or different things than we do when we're locked in or trapped into anger or emotional turmoil. I think that's true for all of us. Anybody have any questions or comments? All the way in the back here? I've got two of them. Yeah, go ahead. And then we'll go. Go ahead, sister.
I had a question for a friend of mine. She's a single mom. The dad now has a new girlfriend who has, they're not Torah keepers. My friend is a Torah keeper, but the dad is come away from those beliefs, and now the new girlfriend, they follow Christmas and all that. Mm-hmm. How she's having trouble because the new girlfriend is trying to turn him away from the beliefs of following Torah and is kind of successfully winning her son over to Christmas and all that. What would be a constructive way of dealing with a situation like that?
Great question. Anybody want to tackle that one?
So, I'll turn the microphone on. When my mom and dad got divorced, they decided that even though my mom had been baptized, that I obviously was going to live with her, that I would celebrate all the Christian holidays, and then she wouldn't keep me from celebrating the biblical holy days. So when I was growing up, I had the best of both worlds, and that worked out until what? Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, who doesn't want Christmas presents? Let's just be honest, That's a great time. It's not right, but, sin isn't always ugly. And that's just the bottom line of it all.
Amen.
I mean, so my point is that that changed, though. At some time, my mom started beginning to dislike the faith and the way that things were going. And so she was sort of pulling. And at the same time, my dad was really trying to get me to come away from Christmas. And so here I was being pulled between these two worlds. And I wasn't physically being torn, but I was really being pulled. I'd go to Dad's house, and he would talk me out of Christmas or this and that, really try to drive that point home. And then I'd go home, and my mom would deprogram me and talk me out of all of this, and it was a nightmare. And at one point, I remember I'd made the decision I was going to start celebrating Christmas and forget about the holy days. And Dad didn't like that, and he tried to talk me out of it. But and then I changed back. And at one point, my mom decided she was going to cut me off from going and celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles when I was around 14 years old, and I was not going to have that. And so I actually moved out of my mom's house to go live with my dad, which was something he'd been wanting for some time. And so it can be a really difficult situation. And I guess my thing would be to just, I mean, maybe this won't work, so it may not be the best advice, but it just seems like the truth can prevail. I mean, I don't know if we're training our children and the wife is not really trying to pull so hard, but just really emphasize the truth. Kids are smart, and I think that the decision will ultimately fall on the side of truth, but that may not be a guarantee. But I just know that being tossed and turned like that and pulled in two different directions is very difficult on the child. And for sure, I mean, if is it a teenager? I'm assuming that's wanting to celebrate Christmas now. Preteen, like 10 or 11. Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to celebrate Christmas? So, I mean, just give them a pass for a little while, too, because, I mean, it's glamorous and it's shiny and it's fun and it's warm. You see what I'm saying? But so is the Feast of Tabernacles, 10 times so. And so they'll get that, I think. I made the decision for Tabernacles and to stop celebrating Christmas when I was probably around 11 or 12. But I made the decision myself, and that's when I stopped celebrating it. And my mom was not happy, but at one point I had decided to celebrate Christmas, and then I made the different decision. So I just think that giving time and grace is, in my opinion, the best possible outcome.
Yeah, and I love Keith's comments because he lived it and he experienced it. And in some instances, I think if you realize that the child is ultimately going to look at behavior more so than what you think is truth, that can go a long way. So if you have sort of a negative attitude about everything, they might just choose Christmas because you have a negative attitude about Tabernacles, or it might go vice versa. So you've got to kind of consider that. The other thing is, if you have to have some kind of make a decision, what I would do and suggest is that your friend take another friend, maybe you, and go and sit with the couple, the dad and the girlfriend, to explain about what your position is, and that is that although you want him to do Christmas, we may not have an objection to it, but please do not trash Tabernacles. Because let's work together. At some point, they'll make the decision, but he'll do Christmas with you guys, he'll do Tabernacles and Passover with me. Let's not trash him. The problem, the thing that I get is the disrespect of saying, well, you're not going to do that. Now, that's on the edge of disrespect. And I think that's when the parent needs to say, okay, wait a minute, I'm not going to have that. I'm not going to disrespect your Christmas, but you're not going to disrespect my, the Tabernacles, however way you want to put it. I think that's important. You got to have that conversation and see where you take it.
It's a boundary that's already been set. I mean, you have a parent and a parent, and so they're having the different way to do it. But we have to allow that same. Yahweh gave those two people that child, and so they both have opinions. And so if they go awry, you still have to, outside of abuse and other things like that, you have to let those opinions exist, in my opinion. And you have to take again, I think with all of these issues, I think we can go back and say it's the crock pot approach. Time. Keep putting into that relationship, keep adding love, keep adding Yeshua, and I think over time it does work out for the truth. I really like that analogy as well. Okay, we had another question back here. Yeah.
Coming from a divorced family myself, before any memories that I've had, as a child, it really hurt me to not know what it was like to have a family, a mother and a dad, and a family that, was one whole solid unit. So maybe one of you guys could speak to, I don't know if there's a resolution or just maybe how to comfort a child who may be going through that. I think it's something that we may not recognize in a lot of situations.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, when I was in my later 20s, my parents got divorced, and you think that you're in your later 20s, everything's good, and the world's all fine, and you're not going to be affected by this. And I remember when that happened, it shook me up. Like, it shook up my feelings about my marriage. It shook up my feelings about being a minister. It shook up my feelings about stability in my life. It's sort of like some of even the things that Scott was talking about today, where all of a sudden, simple things that you're thinking about now are all in question because of a situation that happened where yesterday you weren't even asking those questions, and today you're thinking, am I going to survive 50 years in one marriage? Am I going to still love my wife when I get to that age? Am I going to, and all those things that go through. So as a child, you go through those things, and I'll tell you, one of the things that I had to come to realize through a process of time was, and again, I would reference it back to when I was in school. Like, as a young guy, I remember telling people and thinking when I heard other people getting divorced, that'll never happen to my parents. That'll never happen. And so in my heart, that was always like a pride thing, to where I wasn't like everybody else that was the victims of divorce. My family's stable. And so when you have those kind of feelings, and then your world gets rocked, and then you have to tear that pillar down and say, okay, I am that guy now. And I'm 27 years old, and I'm struggling, and everybody's looking at you like, what's wrong with you? You're old, but it's still my parents. It's my mom and dad that I wanted to see live together till they parted the world, and that was like a big expectation of mine. And so there was a point where I had to make a decision that I'm going to live in the house that I build. And whatever house I build, that's the one I'm going to live in. I don't have to live in my dad's house anymore. I did it one time, but now I can put my eyes on the Father that I know can not fail. And I began to shift that in my mind. Even today, my father's passed, and I can't go back and talk to him. And so I had to make peace with that. Maybe like the gentleman was talking about, sit there and let your grief out even after someone passes. There was a time when I just made a decision in my heart to say, okay, I can't have the approval of my father, but I can have the approval of my heavenly Father. And if I get that favor and approval, I have something really of value, even beyond our relationships here. So, putting your focus on the right things and getting through that process. Again, it's a crock pot. It ain't going to happen tomorrow, but you have to give it time and let Yahweh heal your heart. So that's what I would say. Go ahead, Scott.
I think from the perspective, I'll share the experience with my grandson again. So he never saw his biological father after he was about a year old, so he never really knew him, right? And between about that time until he was about 4 years old, he didn't have any recognition that he was any different than anybody else, right? He looked around him, he saw children in two-parent families, and he didn't realize or understand that anything was different. About the time he was 4, he started asking, where's my dad, right? And at 4 years old, you're given some general and vague answers. By the time they're 5, 6, 7 years old, you have to answer more specific questions about what happened. So, and up to this day, he's 12 now, and of course he thinks about all these things. And a lot of them you don't realize he's thinking about because we don't think about them. But once in a while he pops a question. And as he gets older, the questions become more pointed. He wants to know more. Yeah. He wants to know who this person was, why this person is no longer in his life. And in spite of the fact that he now has a good relationship with a stepfather and recognizes him as his dad in some way, those questions still haunt him. The important thing for any of us to remember, I think, is that it's okay to have those questions. As you're growing up as a child, as you recognize you're different, there's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. And it's an understanding then, I think, that as you interact with other people, that they recognize that about you. You can't, like Dwayne said, you can't go back and change time. But it's okay to be who you are and where you are. And it's okay to have to deal with that even as you're growing into an adult. I don't know if that's really good advice so much as just recognizing, and we should all recognize that's a reality of what we're dealing with in any kind of broken situation.
That's true. All right. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, so my wife never met her father. She was actually raised by her grandparents. Her mother, she was raised, her mother as her sister. So after she was born, her mother was very young, 15, I believe, whenever she gave birth to my wife. And so obviously a 15-year-old kid can't take care of a baby. So her grandparents adopted her and raised her just like any of the other kids. So my wife's sisters are much older than she is. And it wasn't until she was a teenager before she really figured out that, hey, this 15-year-old sister is not my sister. That's actually my mother. And started working through those issues. Never knowing her dad, never knowing exactly what happened, just hearing kind of vague stories of wild teenagers and drugs and all of this stuff, and what led to her being adopted by her grandparents and raised in that fashion. And so I was best friends with my wife in high school, so I've seen this kind of dynamic play out for the majority of her life. And so, yes, there are issues that you have to deal with. You know, everybody has a tendency to want to seek out their heritage, to want to seek out their roots. That's exactly. Right. Yeah. And sometimes you just run into a brick wall where you don't know what's beyond that wall. She doesn't have any idea of even things like medical history. You know, whenever you're talking about predisposition to disease or to cancer or something like that, there's just some things she doesn't know. The same thing happens with adopted kids most of the time. Now, I believe you can go back and find out those parental relationships easier than you used to be able to, but it's just something that you have to recognize and accept that there are some things that you will never know, some relationships you will never have, and try to foster the best relationships you can with what you have, because that's what Yahweh has placed in your life. And for myself, I was 20 years old when my dad died. He was a truck driver, died in Arizona. I had a little brother that was 6 years old. Now, for myself, I was in the military when this happened, and I spent the next 10 years off in the military, but my 6-year-old brother was left without a dad. And so he was raised by my mom, and then subsequent years she began dating and eventually married another man. And so I had a stepdad whenever I was getting married. That's whenever my mom got married shortly after I got married for the second time, or she got married for the second time shortly after I got married. And I've only been married once, just to clear that. And but my little brother had to go through all of that scenario, and just kind of seeing from a distance, because I was off in the military and coming back after so many years, and then the times I was able to visit during that time period, seeing him go through that situation of his dad dying when he was very young, and then kind of different guys come in as my mom was over the years just trying to find companionship, and eventually married my stepdad. And then he eventually passed away, but it's a whole different dynamic that you have to work through these issues, pray a lot. Yahweh can heal wounds if you're willing to open yourself up in prayer. Yahweh can heal things in your heart that you just wouldn't even realize was an issue. And so a lot of times we just forget that.
Yeah, that's the critical component that we all need. And, I really appreciate the insight, and I hope that was a blessing to you guys. And I know that maybe if you have some further questions, you can catch one of us over here, or Mike, any of the leaders here. If you have something in, it's good to get it out. It's good to talk about that. One of the things that as I'm sitting here and we're going through those last comments, we're connected. Yahweh connected us to the people that gave birth to us. And it's natural for the children to want to find out who they are, where they come from. And it's better in those questions. We don't need to stifle those questions. We need to let people know who they're connected to and then let the truth be there and then deal with the consequences of that. Because when you're trying to force issues and force matters, it just doesn't work so well over time because we're connected. The good news is that we are so connected that Yahweh wants us to be connected to bring health and healing to our families. And in the blended families and the complex families and those relationships, we really need to step up as those who profess Messiah and take on those principles. And the redeemed and restored in this, I think, is a message that needs to go and flow through every blended family we have. Guys, thank you so much. We appreciate you guys' comments as well.